Welcome back to the Panels on Pages podcast, where we talk about comic books and all related media. Today, I wanted to touch on a subject that is sort of kind of a big deal right now, at least to some people. If you are not aware, the current X-Men era has been incredible, in my opinion. There have been just some great changes, not the least of which has been a relaunch of every major title. We had a brand new X-Men, New Mutants, Excalibur, X-Factor, X-Force. All of these books had a brand new number one as far as back as, I think, February or January of 2020. Now, some of those books were going bi-weekly, some of those books were going monthly. It really varied. Schedules changed over time. It was actually kind of an interesting thing to keep up with as far as where the stories were going. You had stuff that started in New Mutants that was resolved in X-Men. It was all really well interconnected. It was kind of like the best parts of the 90s, at least in my opinion, like the best parts of the 90s, where stuff that was happening in X-Force would then like leak over into X-Men, leak over into Excalibur, etc. And this was all just being built towards the greater, grander Krakoan ideal. I'm not going to dive too much into like the specifics of it, but I do want to point out that there was no official X-Men team during this time. During these last 12 to 14 months, it's all been about growing the mutant nation. It has not been about forming specific teams. Now, they did have specific teams assigned to specific tasks. X-Force is kind of their intelligence group. X-Factor is their investigations. New Mutants, for instance, has been about the kids that were the kids growing up, and now they are the teachers. They are teaching the next generation, but also some background behind the scenes stuff. It's been very, very interesting across the board. However, that all changed today. Today is the 7th of July, 2021, and X-Men #1 launched today. I know you're saying, but you just said there was an X-Men #1 at the beginning of 2020. Why would there be another X-Men #1? And that's kind of the problem that people have with it. Why is there a new X-Men #1? It's not a direction change. It's not a change in the idea. We're not telling a completely different story. It's continuing from the last thing that happened in the most recent kind of event thing for them, the Hellfire Gala. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Pretty big stuff, though. You should be catching up. It's not like the beginning of the Hickman era, right? It's not coming out of an Uncanny X-Men series that was kind of weird and ended basically with a bunch of the X-Men dying and all this really weird stuff to then go into this entirely new era. Everything's different. We are just breaking all the rules, setting all new rules. Yeah, that all made sense. #1s across the board because nothing is the same. But this is very much the same. The only difference is that during the Hellfire Gala, and this I have to tell you this because that's the whole point here, the Mutant Nation held an election. Psychically connected, everyone decided who the new X-Men team was going to be. You had Scott and Jean as the core, and then they brought on Polaris, Synch, Wolverine, Laura, Sunfire, and Rogue. I knew I was forgetting somebody, but that's a ridiculous one to forget. And Rogue. A really cool team, interesting dynamics. There's a whole thing, if you haven't been caught up, there's a whole thing with Synch and Laura that has just... Everett went through hell, and anyway, you really should be reading. Why a new #1, though? Now, the traditional thing at Marvel has been now to relaunch books every once in a while. Every few years or so, there's a new point one, and that's the jumping on point. And usually within another year or two, there is like some sort of big event that causes a new relaunch. You had Axis, and that caused a new Iron Man series to start. It was the Superior Iron Man. I think it was Superior. I'm pretty sure it was Superior. During the Dan Slott era, you had the entire thing with Doc Ock happen, and then the Superior Spider-Man started. There's always something that precipitates the need for a new book. I still think that's not necessarily the best excuse, because I think there is something definitely to be said for contiguous numbering, because eventually they all end up going back to those numbers. I mean, look at what happened with Iron Man. You had several Iron Man series from the original all the way to, I think it was 2016 when they did the Invincible Iron Man, and that ended up with going back to the legacy numbers for the Invincible Iron Man, like 656, 657. Like, why did we? I mean, granted, some of those series were necessary. Heroes Reborn, Heroes Return, those were necessary series, necessary relaunches based on the story. I mean, necessary is an opinion, but necessary based on like what was going on. But like Invincible didn't need to happen. The previous Invincible series didn't need to happen. We could have just kept going with the previous Iron Man series and just bring on a new art team. Like that happens. It just feels like they take the excuse of, hey, we're bringing on a new art team, we're slightly changing things, let's relaunch the book. Now personally, I think since there was no official X-Men team, I would have just not had an X-Men book coming out of the line, and that would have kept people on their toes, because then it's like, oh, why is there no X-Men book? Like, why, like, I would have just had an Uncanny book, just call it Uncanny, the one word Uncanny, because it wasn't just about the X-Men, it was more so about the Summers family and kind of how they were dealing with this whole thing. It was a different thing than an X-Men book. It wasn't just an X book. So to me, that would have been the way to go. Just rename that first series and say, hey, now we have an X-Men team. We are now going to have an X-Men #1. We're going to be sending the X-Men to do missions and protect the nation and whatever. That's what we're doing. As opposed to, we've had an X-Men series, 21, 22, whatever it is, issues, and then, no, we're just going to launch a new X-Men #1. Why? For reasons, for sales numbers, because of variant covers, like all of these marketing reasons. Like there's no practical story reason, there's no practical consumer friendly reason, right? There's no reason for us to treat this as a new series. It's just the next issue of X-Men. It could have been 21.1, could have called that the special one, could have done variant covers and just done a 22 with the next part of the story. Like it doesn't make sense to me why this happens besides the marketing, like money motivated stuff. Now in certain respects, I appreciate kind of a separate self-contained story. If you have a Daredevil Man Without Fear, that was a 1-4 self-contained, like flashback-esque story. Once it's done, it's done. You can refer back to it in the primary title, but you could say, all right, we're going to do a Extraordinary X-Men 4-issue miniseries, 6-issue whatever, 12-issue maxi, whatever you want to call it. And we're going to do that, and that'll be a companion book to the main X-Men title. Sure, why not? That's what they did with Extraordinary X-Men previously. That's what they did with X-Men Red, technically, was like a companion. It was like a bridge series between the previous X books, Blue closing, to going into Uncanny. Like, the X-Men Red was a bridge series, because like the thing it tried to do, it basically, like, they basically abandoned going into Uncanny. So it's like, it did the thing it was going to do, and then they were like, all right, we're going to do Uncanny, we need to set up all this other stuff. So it's kind of like we can't really deal with that stuff anymore. So it's been this whole thing, but they did kind of start this idea of building a mutant nation in X-Men Red, and that's kind of where we came to be with the Hickman run. Of course, this is not the first time that they've done this kind of mid-series relaunch effectively for no reason. For instance, you had the Schism era, not the original Schism, the second Schism. Keep reusing stuff. We're doing a new Inferno again. We're doing another Trial of Magneto. Like this, we'll talk about that in another episode. But when they did the Schism the second time around, when Logan and Scott decided, hey, we're butting heads, we have directly opposing viewpoints on how to treat these kids and what to do with them, we're going to go ahead and we're going to peace out. We're going to go and build the Jean Grey School over in Westchester, and you can keep your little mutant militant nation. That's what Logan said. Cyclops is like, you're crazy. You're going to be calling us for help. Shenanigans ensue, but they relaunched Uncanny, but kept X-Men Legacy going, which was the second X-Men title, which had been renamed New X-Men at one point. It got renamed again to X-Men Legacy. The point is, they relaunched it for no reason. Following that, ironically, we didn't have an adjective-less X-Men title until the new Hickman run. Everything since then has been some sort of adjective X-Men title. Extraordinary, Astonishing, X-Men Red, X-Men Blue, X-Men Gold, and then Uncanny. So, like, this was last year when they launched a new X-Men title. This was the first X-Men title that had no adjective for a long time, and then even within that, we didn't have an X-Men team. So now we do, and now we have an X-Men team going forward, which makes sense why they would launch a new X-Men title. It just seems, I don't know. I don't know where it's coming from. This feels too well orchestrated of a time frame for the X-Men and the mutant nation for it to be just a marketing thing. I just believe in Hickman too much for this to be like something that editorial said, hey, we want to relaunch X-Men to like build up hype. I just don't think, it just doesn't make sense for that to be true. Then I'm looking at it from a perspective of, all right, Hickman is doing this on purpose. Hickman is doing this because this is how he wants to tell the story. And then I'm wondering why. My only thing I can think of is collected editions, like how the chapters of the story. Dawn of X, which is everything up until 10 of Swords, is I think 16 volumes. 10 of Swords is one massive volume, like 22 issues, I think, something like that. And then the next chapter in that, I think, is going to be Hellfire Gala. I think the Hellfire Gala might have kind of the preamble, the couple issues after 10 of Swords leading up to the Gala. And then we'll be going into Trial of Magneto, and then we'll be going into Inferno and all this stuff. I think it's just to like mark the chapters, honestly. Because X-Men, I think 21 was the last issue, and that was the last issue within the Hellfire Gala. So when they collect that, when they tell that chapter of the Hickman run, the Krakoan era, that'll be like a completed portion of it. And then when you, but again, that doesn't necessarily, in my opinion, that doesn't matter, because then it could have just been 22. Okay, cool. Now this is the Trial of Magneto. It starts, X-Men 22 is this chapter, or whatever, chapter 1, chapter 0, whatever you want to call it, of the Trial of Magneto, or whichever. I don't know. I'm not sure how it's working exactly, if Inferno is going to be next, or if Trial of Magneto is going to be next, or maybe they'll be concurrent. I thought my like perspective on the whole thing was going to be Dawn of X, Reign of X, Fall of X. 3-arc story makes sense to me, and like the Gala is like the only part that would be Reign of X, because now we have the Trial of Magneto, now we have Inferno. That all feels like Fall of X. So it's like we have this just real tiny peak, right, where they're like, boom, we're mutants, we have all this shit, check out our newly terraformed planet. We placed someone specific as the regent of the entire Sol system. By the way, again, you really should be reading, because that moment to shut Doom up. I'm not even going to say it, but Doom says, hey, I speak for Latveria. You say this is the throne world of this system. Who speaks for Sol? And then, pow! Such the moment. I cannot even give it justice. Read it. It was Sword number 9, if I'm not mistaken. Whatever, the most recent issue of Sword that had to do with the Gala. Man, just what a moment. But my point is, they're like flashing their powers, they're flashing their abilities. This is the Reign of X. This is where everything is kind of in control, quote unquote. But if you're reading all the books, that's not true, because we also have the, what are they calling it? The Onslaught Revelation, which is coming out of Way of X. That's certainly going to bring up some feelings, because I have the Onslaught big book behind me, and last I checked, he was dead. But then if you're reading the current X books, they're resurrecting mutants. So maybe when they resurrected Xavier, because I don't think they resurrected Magneto at all, but when they resurrected Xavier, maybe that brought back Onslaught. Who knows? I mean, I'm sure they'll have an explanation. Regardless, all of this stuff is happening. All of it's happening congruently. All of it's happening within kind of the whole era of Hickman. And yet, we get a new number 1. And like I said, this is so well planned out that it's very difficult for me to believe that this was an editorial decision. They're like, oh, you're going to be putting together an X-Men team, we're going to have to launch that as a number 1. Like, that just doesn't feel like that's what happened. Ultimately, you have people, like somebody I was talking to on TikTok, who was saying, oh, after 21, I'm canceling it from my pull list because this is a money grab. So now, the thing that you were hoping for, right, the hype and it's a new team, it's a new book, the thing you're hoping for, no one wants. Well, not no one, obviously. People are going to buy it. It's X-Men. But, like, the people that were on board are no longer on board. And that's a problem. That's a monetary sales problem. The idea I'm going for here is very much stop relaunching for no reason. There was something very, very special about Action Comics 1000, Detective Comics 1000. Huge numbers, huge numbers. Spawn, which is an independent comic book series, hit 100, huge numbers, tons of variants. Hit 300, huge numbers, tons of variants. I think it was 100, 200, 250, 300. I think they're pushing it 350 now, maybe even more. I'm not even up to date. My point is, they didn't have to relaunch Spawn for people to get excited. Tons of variants, lots of great artists involved, and people ate it up. Ate it up. You don't need to relaunch X-Men for people to get excited. Just say, hey, 21.1, this is our like jump on point, which is what you've done before. Like, this is not a new concept for Marvel. Put it on, say 21.1, 5, 6, 12 variants. I don't give a shit. I don't buy variants. Like, I like seeing the artwork, but I don't buy variants. I don't buy single comics. My point is, have these things there, but as part of the main story. Like, when we hit X-Men 1000, I don't know that it's going to feel special. Are you going with Uncanny? What are you counting? You know, what are you counting for that 1000? Because you've relaunched so many times, what is the continuation? Because are you saying Uncanny is the original series? All right, cool. That means we won't have, like right now, everything that's happening, that won't count towards 1000 Uncanny issues. Like, because you keep relaunching, you're going to lose what's special about that original numbering. Every once in a while, Marvel's like, oh, legacy numbering. And they spit it out, and then nothing happens with it. Literally nothing. Like, they did it for a while. They had both numbers, and I thought that was leading up to something. I thought they were like, all right, we're going to hit X-Men 500. Boom. And I think that came and went. I think they did do something for 600. That was like a big, like 4, 5, 6 variants. The point is, just put out the book. It doesn't need to be relaunched. It doesn't need to be something special. The whole point here is marketing shouldn't dictate how these stories are told and how these books are presented to people. The idea that people buy number ones, of course, that's backed up by numbers. Like, there's no way to argue that. But the problem is the people buying those number ones aren't buying them to read comics and to read more comics and to buy more comics down the line. They buy number one, they put it in a fucking sealed case, and then in 2 years, they're like, who's buying? They don't care about the story. So don't cater to those people. Who cares if a few collectors buy 30 copies? Awesome. They bought 30 single comic books, and they may never buy another X-Men comic book again. But if this X-Men series runs another 40 issues, and this one person who I spoke with, for instance, said they were canceling because they were relaunching, but if they had just stayed on and they bought those 40 more issues, that's more money than the 30 copies of number one you sold to the one person who's never going to buy another X-Men book again. There's value to treat the people that are with you the whole time like they matter. Number ones are a great jumping on point, but the problem is with this, especially with this, it's jumping in to shark-infested water. So many things have happened to get to this number one issue. Anyone buying this as a new reader is going to be out of their mind confused. That's not helpful to them either. Just stop relaunching stuff. If you want to say, hey, all right, the X-Men title is done. We're going to launch Uncanny X-Men, and that'll follow this whatever thing. Cool. That's fine. X-Men has a history of adjective books. That's fine. That makes sense to me. That's what they did with Extraordinary, with Xavier and the whole thing. That was an interesting, separate storyline. The last few years have really shown what you could do and how you could tell different stories with these different titles. But when you just relaunch the main title in the middle of a story arc, it serves no story purpose. It serves no purpose to the people who are buying, the people who are continuing to purchase books, the people who are fans. They're getting number one fatigue. They're getting relaunch fatigue. I mean, DC only does this every 5 to 7 years, and people get mad at that. Like, you just relaunched the universe in 2015 with Secret Wars, and then you just relaunched X-Men last year. Let it go. Let it ride a little longer before you relaunch everything again. I mean, you're canceling X Factor, you're canceling Excalibur, you're canceling all these books to go into these big event stories. I mean, cool, but like all that means is that people aren't going to keep buying stuff. Like, why can't we just keep having an Excalibur book? I understand it's all interwoven and blah, 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 but like, we should keep having an Excalibur book. It doesn't make sense to cancel that unless you're going to relaunch that too. We're going to get a new Excalibur #1. We're going to get a new X Factor #1. Like, this is all, at this point, then it's silly. Unless there is some sort of grand design that I don't see, this seems to be getting pretty damn silly. I don't know. I've said a lot on this. I'm going to stop talking. That's going to be it for this one. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And I'll see you next time.